My name is John. I'm 36 years old, and for the last decade, I've worked as an independent environmental contractor, mostly doing survey work in the national forests across the Pacific Northwest. I'm comfortable in the deepest, wettest, most remote sections of Washington state, the places where the air smells like perpetually damp earth and old-growth pine. I know the sounds of a cougar, the scent of a bear, and the distant, territorial call of a wolf pack. What happened in the Olympic National Forest this past November, however, was none of those things. It was a failure of classification, a hole in the known biological world, and the absolute end of my peace of mind. It started not with a dramatic chase, but with a silence. I was 3 days into a survey loop, about 40 miles from the nearest logging road, when I realized the birds had stopped. Not a slow quietening, but an immediate, unnatural cessation. The only sound was the drip of condensation off the giant cedars. It was mid-afternoon, the light already failing under the thick canopy. I chalked it up to a nearby raptor, maybe, but the hair stood up on my arms, a pure, instinctual alarm bell that 10 years in the field has taught me never to ignore. I reached for the satellite phone in my pack, just to check in, but the screen was dead, not even a flicker of the battery light. I'd charged it the day before. I decided to make camp early, near a small, frozen tributary. That's when I found the deer. It wasn't a clean kill. Cougars are precise, leaving distinct puncture marks. Bears tear and rend, but their feeding pattern is recognizable. This animal, whatever it was, had snapped the deer's spine clean in half, like a twig. The torso was mostly intact, but the damage to the neck was surgical in its severity and brutal in its execution. More disturbing were the tracks. They weren't pads or paws. They were feet, larger than any human foot I'd ever seen, with thick, non-retractable claws that dug deep into the frozen mud. The gait was wrong, too long, too heavy, like something trying to walk upright but failing, needing the forward lean of a beast. I estimated the creature's weight must have been north of 400 pounds. I didn't wait to set up the tent. I grabbed my pack and my rifle, and started moving, the fear of cold knot in my stomach. I pushed east, heading for higher ground in the faint hope of a signal, using a compass and sheer adrenaline. The forest was watching me now. Every shadow was movement, every shift in the wind a breath. The real horror began just after sunset, when I was navigating a particularly dense section of secondary growth. I was low, trying to stay off the ridgeline. I heard the scream. It wasn't animalistic. It was a man, high-pitched, dissolving into a ragged gurgle that cut off abruptly, like a switch was thrown. The sound came from maybe a quarter-mile north, the direction I had just come from. I dropped flat into the ferns, heart hammering a frantic rhythm against the damp earth. Then came the sound of the chase. It was heavy. Not running, exactly, but a terrifying series of rapid, powerful bounds, shaking the ground even at that distance. The beast was traveling faster than anything that large should be able to move through this kind of dense terrain. It sounded like a massive boulder being dragged over root systems and fallen logs, interspersed with heavy, wet impacts. I stayed motionless for an hour, the night growing impossibly cold and silent again. When I finally dared to move, I followed a creek bed to mask my sound, putting distance between myself and the source of the shriek. By 2 a.m., exhaustion had set in. I found a hollow beneath a massive, toppled fir, a root cage protected from the rain. I huddled there, rifle across my lap, trying to process the impossible. My mind kept trying to rationalize, a bear, a sick elk, a trick of the wind. But the scream was human, and the tracks were wrong. I drifted off into a shallow, fearful sleep. I woke to the scent. It was a mix of decay, wet dog, and metallic ozone, thick and sickening, pressing into the small space. It was right outside the root cage. I didn't breathe. I didn't dare move. My fingers were locked around the rifle stock, safety off. A sound started then, right above me. Not a snarl, but a deep, guttural inhale, a sound of pure, hungry calculation. A shadow fell across the opening, impossibly large. Then came the scratching. The claws were thick, black, and dull, tearing chunks of old bark and moss from the log above my head. The movement was measured, methodical. It knew I was there. It wasn't sniffing around, it was waiting for me to move, playing with its prey. I caught a glimpse of its leg through a crack in the roots. It was thick as a telephone pole, covered in rough, grayish-black hair, but the muscle beneath was taut and corded, like steel cable. The foot was enormous, digitigrade, walking on its toes, and unnervingly humanoid in its basic structure, yet twisted into a weapon. I realized then that this thing wasn't an animal that had simply gone rogue. This was a predator with malignant intelligence. Seconds stretched into an eternity. I thought about firing, but the confined space and the sheer mass of the creature meant a single shot wouldn't stop it, and would only provoke a death strike. Finally, with a loud, wet snort, the shadow shifted. The bounding started again, moving away, faster this time, like it had spotted more interesting game. I waited 10 minutes before crawling out, trembling uncontrollably. I ran until dawn, discarding everything that wasn't vital: sleeping bag, extra water bottles, spare clothes. I kept the rifle, ammunition, and a minimal first aid kit. As the gray light broke, I saw what had distracted the beast. I came upon a narrow, unmarked logging trail not on any map I knew, and saw a government utility vehicle, a heavy-duty black SUV, parked crookedly. The doors were ajar, the engine running. In the driver's seat was the man from the Scream. Or what was left of him. He was wearing a uniform, some kind of unlabeled, tactical dark blue, not Forest Service or State Patrol. His body was slumped, but his head was gone. Not torn off, but crushed. It looked like someone had hit it with a sledgehammer wrapped in barbed wire. And then I saw the second set of tracks. Human boots, military style. They led away from the vehicle and then stopped abruptly, scuffing the mud in a desperate pivot. The werewolf's tracks, however, covered them instantly, huge and overlapping, indicating the creature had ambushed and then carried the second person off the trail and into the undergrowth toward a nearby ravine. There was no blood on the road, which was the most terrifying detail. This thing was so powerful it didn't need to leave a messy trail, it just took the whole victim. I understood then, I hadn't stumbled upon a monster, I had stumbled upon a purge. This wasn't a legend, it was a biological accident, a failed experiment, or something ancient that the government was trying desperately to contain. The man in the SUV wasn't a civilian, he was a handler, or maybe bait. I took the keys to the SUV, grabbed a radio from the dash that was tuned to an encrypted frequency, and drove like a maniac back towards civilization, using the unmarked trails only the logging companies and the government would know. I made it to the edge of the reservation boundary by noon. I drove straight to the small, one-room sheriff's office in Forks, shaking. I told them everything. I told them about the tracks, the stench, the silence, the scream, and the man with the crushed skull. I even showed them the encrypted radio. The sheriff, a tired-looking man named Henderson, listened without interruption. When I was done, he nodded slowly. "Mr. John," he said, his voice flat, "you've been out in the woods a long time. High-stress environment." He reached over and turned on the local news ticker on a small television in the corner. The headline scrolled, "Tragic logging accident in Olympic National Forest, 2 surveyors killed in equipment malfunction." "I was doing a survey, Sheriff," I insisted, my voice cracking. "I saw the uniform. I saw the tracks. This thing was huge, and it was smart." Sheriff Henderson picked up the radio, his expression hardening. "This is government property, Mr. John. Classified frequency. You shouldn't have taken it. You've had a traumatic experience. We're going to keep you here for a few hours, get you a cup of coffee, and call your family. You need rest." Within the hour, 2 unmarked black sedans, not the typical local vehicles, arrived. 2 men in expensive suits, wearing blank expressions, took the radio, questioned me with rapid fire, pointed inquiries about the creature's exact height and speed, and then told me my account was inconsistent with the accident report. They erased my story. They took my name, cross-referenced my existence, and then surgically removed the last 3 days from my lives record. They told me the 2 victims were logging contractors who strayed off course and were hit by a falling piece of equipment. They gave me a stack of papers to sign, non-disclosure agreements that mentioned national security and inaccurate civilian reporting in terrifyingly specific legal jargon. I signed them all. I wanted out. I left Forks a day later, officially diagnosed with severe environmental delirium and advised to take a mandatory 6-month leave. They kept my SUV, claiming it was involved in the accident investigation. They left me with a rental car and an icy warning not to discuss my hallucinations. I know what I saw. I saw a creature of pure, devastating evil, a biological machine of killing power, and I saw a government that knew exactly what it was and covered it up without blinking. They weren't hunting a wolf or a bear, they were sweeping up a mistake. The tracks I saw leading away from the ambush, the missing second person, the speed of the creature, it was still out there, stalking the fringes of the deep forest, waiting for the next full moon, waiting for the cover-up to fail. I live on the coast now, far from the shadows of the Olympics. But every night, when the wind hits the windows of my small apartment, I don't hear the ocean. I hear the guttural, hungry inhale I heard in the root cage, and I know that the silence I experienced that day wasn't the silence before the storm, but the silence after the government had cleaned up the evidence, leaving only the impossible horror behind.